In the wake of the global economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic, military tensions are ratcheting up around the world. If a nuclear war involving the major players erupted today, the question about what you would do and where you could go has been answered in countless educational videos. But the real question is, how will you know what the real threat level is? Deciphering military plans through the dissonant white noise of the internet and legacy media is difficult, if not futile. We must prepare for the possibility that due to the nature of modern information warfare, we, the civilian population, would likely be the last to know about the imminence of a nuclear war. In this video, we're going to talk about the US Armed Forces Defcon, or Defense Readiness Condition System, and how we as preppers will know if we are truly in a Defcon 1 scenario. So let's get to it. What is the Defcon system? The Defense Readiness Condition, or Defcon system, is a state of alert for the US military and NATO. It's a 5-stage system with level 5 indicating a low state of readiness during a relative peacetime, and level 1 meaning that nuclear war is virtually imminent. It's important to know that the Defcon alert state is not necessarily global and can actually apply to a specific region of the globe only. However, the implication for Defcon 1 may be the use of nuclear weapons, which would of course have global impacts if not lead to a full-blown global nuclear war. For example, currently the United States is at Defcon 3, or 4 depending on which source you're referencing. Europe is at Defcon 2 due to the current Russian-Ukrainian tensions. So this means there is no single Defcon status for all countries or even parts of specific countries. And in fact, different branches of the military can be at different levels of Defcon at the same time within different parts of a country. However, the Defcon system is also commonly used to describe the general state of military tension around the world. Some preppers have colloquially used the Defcon system to describe their own state of readiness. For example, Defcon 5 might signify that there are no immediate threats, and level 1 would mean that you're ready to head into the bunker and escape an imminent threat. Since its inception in 1959, the highest global Defcon level ever reached was Defcon 2, which took place in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. During this period of time, duck and cover exercises in schools were as commonplace as community fallout shelters were, and the Western populations were primed and psychologically ready to accept and endure such a nuclear event. Today, however, in our urban environments, with a population which is many generations removed from the Cold War, most people don't know what a fallout shelter is, and most lack the provisions and survival skills to last a couple weeks in the absence of the just-in-time delivery system. What's more is that if a war did break out today, a whole range of next-generation weaponry would be brought to bear, including cyber, biological, electromagnetic pulse weapons, and of course, nuclear weapons with much more advanced guidance, cloaking, and evasive systems. This general lack of preparedness, paired with the more advanced disruptive weapons, would create chaos at Defcon 1 if it occurred today. But perhaps one of the most pressing questions is, if we were approaching Defcon 1, would the government even tell us? Would people even listen if they did? Most people would say, of course they would. Why wouldn't they provide advance warning to the civilian populations? Unfortunately, there is a good chance they wouldn't, and even if they did, it might prove futile. I would encourage viewers to read the book called Raven Rock, the story of the US government's secret plan to save itself while the rest of us die, to gain insight into the government's historical track record on shielding the population from this threat. The short of it is, that track record is not very good. If, in the era of social media, the government came out today and declared Defcon 2, much less Defcon 1, what would the outcome be? Would it evoke apathy, disbelief, anger, total pandemonium, or maybe just a confluence of all these things? If March 2020 is any indication, my guess would be mass panic and social unrest. This unrest would diminish the government's ability to operate and deploy its assets in order to manage the situation when the smoke cleared. And this makes me wonder if they would even bother telling us at all. In the case of an all-out intercontinental ballistic missile attack on the United States and its allies, with only 20 to 45 minutes to evacuate densely populated areas, even if the government issued a warning, it would be total gridlock on the major corridors within minutes of the announcement, which would likely cause more suffering than it would prevent. This, of course, is assuming that urban centers and civilians would be targeted with such a strike, which according to some military analysts would be unlikely, at least for the first strike. Unless, of course, you're living in a capital city like Washington, D.C. Then you're probably screwed. The majority of people, however, wouldn't know this and would panic anyways and scramble to get out of Dodge as fast as possible. This has been shown historically to be the case. During the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, panic buying ensued, and this was during a time of relative preparedness when people lived off the land or were more closer to rural communities. So we could imagine what the response would be today in a nation that is not in a Cold War mindset, that isn't accustomed to war, and is wholly dependent on technology for its survival. To say people would panic is likely an understatement. It could also be the case that these things would progress so rapidly that the government wouldn't even have time to alert people of the threat. In 1979, a computer glitch briefly elevated the US Air Force to Defcon 1, unbeknownst to millions of Americans who were asleep in their beds. The USA and Russia were minutes away from total annihilation before tensions were diffused, and no one in America knew about the incident until long after it happened. A similar computer malfunction happened with the Russians' nuclear systems in 1983. What good would telling people they had minutes to evacuate the cities or take shelter be under these circumstances? Save a few lives maybe, or just create more chaos? The fact is, we would probably be on our own. How would a nuclear war happen? The truth is, not like most people think. The goal of war is to win the spoils. And because a nuclear exchange might lead to what's called mutually assured destruction, or the end of civilization as we know it, no country has any vested interest in initiating it. And ironically, nuclear technology has effectively been a deterrence against larger scale wars since their creation. However, the problem is that theoretically a nuclear war is winnable if you can sustain a first strike advantage and eliminate your opponent's ability to have a second strike. This means that one country would target another country's military targets, missile silos, air force bases, command centers, naval fleets, and nuclear submarines in order to minimize the possibility that they could retaliate. The goal is to annihilate the opposition's ability to conduct a retaliatory strike. To have this second strike capability and to convince an opponent of its viability is considered vital in nuclear deterrence. So theoretically, a nuclear war is winnable, and this is why the prospect of it is still very plausible. This is, however, good news for civilian populations. Unlike what's depicted in the movies, a first strike may not involve civilian targets. The bad news is that if your country is a victim of the first strike, you have essentially lost the war and will be under the rule of the opposing country. That is, of course, if you can survive the fallout, and no one even wants to think about what would happen to the nuclear power plants and the spent fuel rods within them if they couldn't be maintained after such an incident. What should your state of planning be at the various DEFCON levels? You can go and see your continent's current DEFCON level by visiting defconlevel.com. Currently, the United States, at the time of making this video, is at DEFCON level 3. Europe is at DEFCON level 2 due to the Ukrainian and Russian crisis. Now, how can we leverage the DEFCON system in our own preparedness planning? DEFCON 5 is a state of normal readiness. This is when you go about your daily life and local issues are your primary concern. From a military standpoint, this means that military training and operations continue as normal. The threat of war here is at its lowest possible level. A prepper at Defcon level 5 wouldn't restrict their life in any way. You'd be going on vacations, you'd be working your job, you'd be having fun with friends and family, while of course working towards constant education with respect to preparedness, survival skills, and self-reliance in general. Now, Defcon 4 signifies a heightened period of tension, whether local or global. We are currently at Defcon 4, however some websites claim we are at Defcon 3, and this can vary by region and the branch of the military you're representing. At Defcon 4, you should go about your daily life while maintaining a general emergency preparedness plan. First aid training, some basic provisions stored away, a means of self-defense, and even a muster point for your family members should a threat level increase. At Defcon 3, things start to get more emergent. From a military perspective, perhaps there is a war that has broken out somewhere in which major players are being pulled into. If one player within this war oversteps its boundaries within the designated combat theater, things could escalate. At this level of military readiness, the Air Force is ready to mobilize in 15 minutes or less. In the same way, the prepper's ability to deploy their resources should be ramped up, and a thorough inventory of your preps is warranted. The fundamental difference here is the speed at which you could deploy your resources if you needed to. At this point, you might also want to reconsider any travel plans that you have. At Defcon 2, war is imminent. The level of severity is just below the maximum. An increase to level 2 is very serious, and from a military standpoint, all combat units must be ready to deploy within 6 hours. This condition is defined by a significant risk of major military operations against the United States and its NATO allies. A prepper at Defcon 2 would likely suspend any non-essential activities and be ready to hunker down or bug out at a moment's notice. Defcon 1 would be when countries who are involved in a military engagement are on the brink of losing some pivotal point on the map. When losing ground means losing a war, some countries might feel at this point that there is no other option but to shoot for a first strike nuclear advantage. Nuclear war at Defcon 1 is very likely. At this stage of the game, a prepper's plans would be in full deployment. You will have evacuated or be in the process of evacuating a risk-prone region, or bunkering down in an emergency shelter. Here is a map of declassified USA ICBM targets in Europe. Please note that this was from the Cold War era, so these certainly wouldn't be the same targets used today. You can then use the Nuke app website to determine what the outcome of a nuclear strike would look like on your city. We did a detailed video using this app several years ago that you can go and see here. We will also post a map in the description section of areas within North America that would be likely nuclear targets. And we will also post links to educational videos that show you what to do in the case of a nuclear attack. What are some ways you can leverage this Defcon style system in your own emergency response planning? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy this video. Stay safe. Canadian Prepper out.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.